were drained, our people exploited, bringing deprivation and despair upon us. However, after our hard-earned independence, Indians through generations have put in their hearts and souls to building the nation we see today. The vision of our forefathers is finally seeing fulfillment as India is progressively finding its true place on the world map. India is poised to enter the top 3 economies by the turn of the decade. The expectations from India are at an all-time high, but are we ready to meet them? To discuss the dynamic roadmap to India, past, present, and future ready, we have with us Dr. KV Subramanian, our Chief Economic Advisor. Dr. Subramanian's credentials really need no introduction, but a common thread in his trajectory have been his progressive and forward-thinking mindset. He has authored the Path-Breaking Economic Survey of 2020 and is also the mastermind behind the Economic Survey of 21, which reviewed the vital elements of the Indian economy in the backdrop of the devastating COVID crisis. It set the stage for the path-breaking union budget this year, as well as for the reforms and other initiatives to plan the rebuilding of our nation. Dr. Subramanian is an alumnus of the University of Chicago Booth School, as well as a top rank holder at IIT and IIM. He has done extensive research in behavioral economics, banking, finance, law, and innovation. He has served as faculty member at some of the top universities across the world. There is no one with more insight, knowledge, and skill to be able to guide India back on its growth path. And we are truly lucky to have him here with us today. I'd request Ujjwala Singhania, National President, to welcome Dr. Subramanian.
Thank you, Sunera. Namaste and a very good afternoon. As the 38th National President of FICCI Ladies Organization, it's an absolute honor for me to welcome Shri KV Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. Thank you for addressing us today. Our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi has very rightfully said, India is emerging as a land of opportunities. India offers a perfect combination of openness, opportunities, and options. As we are celebrating India's 75th year of independence with the theme Nation First, Always First, it is an opportune time to reflect on our glorious past, live our best in the present, and work towards a stronger future. Shri Subramanian is one of the top experts in the field of banking, corporate governance, and economic policy. He is the architect of the Economic Survey 2021, which was tabled by Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitaram. Shri Subramanian brings with him a vast knowledge and experience in integrating India's rich economic and spiritual heritage with the modern economic ideas. Talking about economy, India has emerged as one of the fastest growing economy in the world. In one of the recent media interviews, Mr. Subramanian said that the Indian economy is on much stronger footing to absorb any external shocks, thanks to the adoption of a judicious mix of both demand and supply side measures following the COVID-19 outbreak. FLOW is one of the oldest business chambers for women in South Asia, with over 8,000 members across 18 chapters pan-India. This year, my focus is on empowering women by promoting entrepreneurship, industry participation, trade, and economic development of women. To conclude, let me reiterate what Mr. Subramanian believes. Self-reliance of Atma Nirbharta can never happen without adequate capacities, and by capacities are never built in a vacuum, but they are built only by competing with the best. We look forward to a very enriching session today. And as a token of our gratitude, we would like to present you a virtual memento and a green certificate. I would like to request the IT team to show it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We would like to start the session. So I would like to ask you, what are the major current challenges facing the Indian economy in the wake of the pandemic? The fear of the third wave is looming on the horizon, while the country and the economy are still recovering from the second COVID wave. What are the measures being put in place to fight this onslaught?
Thank you very much, Sunita ji and Ujjwala ji and the organizers of this event, FICCI Flow, for inviting me to share my thoughts. First, let me express my gratitude for the wonderful gift and a thoughtful gesture that you just did. Thank you very much. As for the third wave and related economic impacts, I think first thing I want to say, and this is something that we covered in the monthly economic report that was released at the end of this month, at the end of the last month, where we actually had a box looking at the seroprevalence data and also the vaccination data, and thereby then using some of the very recent research published in Lancet, the British Medical Journal, and other leading journals to try and infer what's the level of protection that we have as a country in being able to ride over a potential third wave. So there are a few facts that I want to actually place before we assess this. This is based on the research in immunology and pandemic related stuff that I've been reading over the last year and a half. The first thing that this research points out is that if we get infected, because of the pandemic, and that could happen either if we test positive or some family member tests positive and we get exposed in the process. And that is what actually gets reflected in the seroprevalence data, because what the seroprevalence is effectively measuring is the presence of the immunity. Now, the first piece of research actually that what it suggests is that this immunity lasts for about 6 months at least. 6 to 8 months. So in other words, if I get infected, let's say today, God forbid, then another 6 months I actually will have at least 6 months I'll have the immunity from that. So that's the first piece. And this, if we relate it with the seroprevalence data, India's seroprevalence at the end of the second wave was 70%. So 70% of the population had antibodies, and because this came in the month of July, so effectively we can say that up until December at least, this seroprevalence, actually the immunity provided by that will continue up until December. That's the first. The second important fact that research has unearthed is that even if, let's say, you have taken 1 dose of the vaccine, but if you've been infected, before, then the immunity that you get is very close to 2 doses. In other words, 1 dose of the vaccine plus the the immunity provided by the infection itself is equivalent to 2 doses of the vaccine. The third fact here is that if you look at the seroprevalence among 3 sets of populations, one that got 2 doses, one that has gotten 1 dose, and another that actually has not gotten any dose at all. Those that have gotten 1 dose, the seroprevalence is almost 90%, a little more than 90%. In other words, you have 90% protection. I think the key point there to emphasize is that it is not 100% protection, it is 90%, very high, but still not 100% protection. And that is, therefore indicative that we need to continue following protocols, even if we've gotten the 2 doses. If you have 1 dose, and especially because of the second wave, and those who are infected, the protection seems to be about 85%, 80 to 85%. In contrast, if you've not taken any dose at all, then seroprevalence seems to be about 60%. In other words, if you get vaccinated fully, you're 4 times more protected compared to not having any vaccine shot at all, because 90%, so in other words 10% probability of catching the infection with 2 doses, 60% seroprevalence with no vaccination, so 40% probability of catching catching the infection, so 4 times more likely if you've not gotten the vaccination. Now let's look at the numbers that we have now. close to 60 crore people have been vaccinated with at least one dose in our country. And when you therefore add these two facts, right, and this is something that we did in the monthly economic review, that the vulnerable sections of the population, especially the 45 plus, where death rates have been far higher, they've been far more vulnerable. That's where protection flow. About 85% of the population is protected. I think that's the good news that actually so that we can look at. Even if there is a third wave that comes, I think two things will happen because of the progress of the vaccination and the immunity from the second wave itself. That first, hospitalizations may not be as intense, may not be as large as a proportion of the actual cases as it was during the second wave. Second, deaths may actually be much lower. And I think if you look at the data for the United Kingdom, for instance, if you look at the second wave and the third wave, in that first 50 days, the number of cases have been identical, almost identical. And yet deaths have been a very small fraction compared to the second wave. And that is indicative of the, of the protection provided by vaccination. So in other words, put it all together, and one of the things I always emphasize is we have to actually make our decisions based on empirical evidence, careful evidence and research, not just go by anecdotes. Just because one person, let's say, who had 2 shots still, had a severe case, let's say, we use that to say, अरे देखो उसको एक बंदे दो डोज लगा था तब भी उसको हो गया, इसलिए vaccination काम ही नहीं करता है. This kind of basically anecdotal decision making that we make, I think we have to try and avoid that. Really be careful in terms of actually what we interpret. So in some, what I would want to say is that the third wave, even if it comes, it actually, on the health side, the impact may not be as large because hospitalizations and deaths are likely to be lower. Now on the economic part, I think what is important to understand, and if you look at the data, the high frequency indicators like GST payments, e-way bills, etc., the second wave had a far lower impact on the economy than the first wave. And that's because the restrictions that were placed during the second wave were all at the state level. As a result, they were heterogeneous in their intensity and they were asynchronous in their timing. And essentials was not impacted. Moreover, interstate activity, especially interstate movement, was allowed. As a result, the economic restrictions actually were just about the bare minimum in some sense, to be able to stop the flow of the pandemic. And therefore, the economic impact of the second wave is unlikely to be very large. We do expect this year, despite the second wave, we expect with a very high likelihood double-digit growth, in the economy this year, and I think that's something which would really help in the recovery that is on. Now, when you take on actually and project for the third wave, as I said, firstly, the third wave from a health perspective is not likely to be that intense. And even if it is, actually the economic impact will not be as large, because I think not only India but other countries have actually learned how to deal with the pandemic. Unlike in the first wave, where all countries had very stringent lockdowns, India in particularly a very strong one. I think we've learned how to actually manage the economy amidst the pandemic, and therefore the third wave, even if it is actually large in terms of cases, I don't think the economic impact will be that large.
Thank you so much for all the information. Sir, I would like to ask you, the inspiration of many government initiatives and policies have come from the economic survey and suggestion. Do you think the coordination between the government and your office are optimized to make the maximum impact to the country and the economy? What are the other reforms and policy changes would you recommend to the government?
So yeah, so yours is a two-part question here. As for the first part, I think I must say that I've been very, very fortunate to have a very smooth relationship with the senior functionaries in the government, and I think a lot of credit, of course, has to go to the decision makers, because it's one thing for economists like us to actually suggest things to do, but another thing for the people who have to make those decisions to actually make those decisions. So I think I would say that the making good suggestions is necessary, but never sufficient. The sufficiency comes from decision makers, having the courage to take decisions, number one. Number two, also listening carefully and actually, and I think, placing trust on people like us, that we would actually make the right suggestions. So I think a lot of credit, I would say 99% of the credit should go to the decision makers, because eventually they are the ones that, who have to, who have to bear the consequences, positive and negative, so I think the credit has to go to them. As for the coordination, as I said, it's been very, very good, phenomenally very good. I think one thing I can tell you, which is something that really, is something that I've found myself very fortunate, is, in my close to 3 decades of professional career, I'm yet to encounter, a better listener and a better motivator than the Honorable Prime Minister. This is coming from someone who's seen the best in the world, be it industry captains, be it top policymakers, be it Nobel laureates, having seen the best over the last 3 decades, by far the best listener. His body language, is neither does it convey any impatience, nor does it convey lack of interest, whether it's actually a meeting early in the morning or late in the evening. I think that's testimony to his very, 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 very high quality as a listener. And I think the other thing is also something that he's been, steadfastly encouraged, at least I can speak for myself, is that, he basically has encouraged, that we speak our mind. Internally, basically say it the way we see it. I think so. It's because of those qualities that I think some of us have been able to make the right suggestions, and be brave enough to make the suggestions that are good for the country. And I think because of the careful listening, I feel like that they have been, implemented upon. As for the second part of your question, I would say 2 things. One, there's a lot that's been done. I think, right now we need to sort of, there's a lot that has been bitten in terms of on the reform space, right? So that needs to be chewed and actually implemented. I think that's the first thing that I would say. And once we do that, then I think a next round of reforms actually can be done. And I think the next round of reforms will really have to focus on some of the aspects of state capacity. When I talk about that, for instance, the judicial reforms, and especially the fact that we languish, out of 190 odd countries, 192 countries, we are in the bottom, 10th percentile or so, in the ease of enforcement of contracts. I think that is something that all of us as Indians must really become cognizant of, and the judiciary in particular needs to actually, take cognizance of, show themselves the mirror and start working on themselves. I think, it's fine for them to actually, show a conscience in terms of, other public policy issues, etc. But I think as Shri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Swayadharma, basically that is what, one has to do first. So their dharma, which is basically to ensure that the ease of enforcement of contracts is enhanced actually, and that, we come into at least the top 100, in the next few years, if not in the top 50. But there has to be, I think, action on that. I think that is something that I would really lay out as an important, and at the same time also, actually, I think the second is the bureaucracy, and I think reforms there, some steps have been initiated, but I think that needs to be taken to, to its logical conclusion as well. Especially given the kind of, economic change that is now happening with the private sector being enabled. I think the mindset with which, these the function of government has to be seen. I think those need important change. So these are the two things that I would mark out as next in terms of state capacity. Even police reforms, I think I would say, these are two, three very important aspects on state capacity. But I think right now we must basically ensure that the measures that have been taken, those get implemented and they are seen to their logical conclusion.
Thank you. And we totally agree with you that our Prime Minister is truly a great leader. I would invite Sunera to take this session forward.
Thank you, Ujjwala. Thank you, Dr. Subramanian. Listening to you, especially about the double-digit growth, was very, very promising to all of us. And also, thank you for putting into perspective the serosurveillance data that we read, but perhaps don't understand the full implication of. So really, thank you for putting that in perspective. And taking forward from there, I'd like to ask, because there is another thing that baffles many of us, and that is regarding the, like the US has an alarming debt balance of more than $28 trillion against India's balance of $570 billion. Yet they print currency and it doesn't depreciate. And we are so conservative that we don't print currency even during this pandemic time, these dire times. Why is this concern about this credit rating and why this dichotomy? I'd love for you to put this in perspective.
It's a very good question. I mean, if I have to do full justice to this answer, I think it'll have to be a one hour session. But let me try and capture in brief. I don't know how many of you noticed, but in this year's economic survey we had written a chapter on credit ratings. The chapter was titled "Do India's fundamentals reflect? Do India's sovereign ratings reflect its fundamentals?" ? Answer no with an exclamation mark. So do India's sovereign ratings reflect its fundamentals ? No exclamation mark. And I think that the chapter title itself communicates basically what was the main. See, it's important to understand that these sovereign rating models were evolved in the 1960s. They came about in the 1960s when it was mostly the American and the European economies which were the ones that had very high credit ratings at that time, and these were also the countries that had very high GDP per capita, and therefore in the empirical models, the data models that were evolved at that time by the rating agencies, GDP per capita was a very important determinant. Now, despite almost more than a decade of the global financial crisis, which has now really pulled into or put in question the role of GDP per capita in credit ratings, yet the 50-year-old model has not been changed. They're just tweaking it here and there a little bit, but tweaking is not good enough. The economy after the global financial crisis is very different, because countries like Ireland, Greece, etc., which are very high GDP per capita, but actually ended up defaulting, on their obligations. But countries like India, many other countries did not. And so, that really puts into perspective, how much GDP per capita can be relied on in this situation after the global financial crisis, and yet rating agencies actually have not changed their models. And I say this with authority, because this is something, it's an area where I understand really well. I've done research in this area, and so say it with utmost confidence that the sovereign rating agencies, actually their models are wrong on these aspects, and they basically are still, they're caught in a time warp, and that is why these are and as a result, what happens actually is that if you look at, and this was the first chart that we showed in the economic survey chapter, if you plot the rating of the 5th largest economy in the world, since the 1990s, and do remember that has changed, that baton of the 5th largest economy has changed hands. China was in the 1990s, today it is India, and so on. If you look at that, invariably, when it has been a country in in Europe, or for instance North America, which has been the 5th largest economy, the rating has been consistently AAA. It's only when either China or India that has actually broken into this very elite club, or the top 5 economies, that this rating slumps. Actually, in the case of China, it slumps to actually, I think, A, and India it is actually BBB. In other words, in this history of sovereign ratings, the 5th largest economy has never ever been rated so low as India today is, at BBB. And that tells you actually the time warp in which these models are stuck. That said, unfortunately, there is sometimes a fear that, when you are just the investment grade, if you go down just even one notch, a lot of investment actually is based on, the country's sovereign rating being above the, being investment grade. In fact, the reason we wrote this chapter was precisely to actually reduce this fear, saying that among policymakers that, look, we are actually trying to give far more weight to something that is very, very erroneous. And I think that, I would like to think that played maybe a small part in us, really expanding fiscally in the budget, doing capital expenditures, etc. But I think, unfortunately, even sort of erroneous models like these actually have traction, and create real constraints. The other point to actually keep in mind, because you started this question by talking about the US. US has has dollar as a reserve currency, and in some sense it's like it is said about the Kardashians that they are famous for being famous. Similarly, in the case of the dollar, it is basically seen to be a reliable currency because it's thought to be a reliable currency. It's sort of that kind of parallel, right? And that's the advantage that the greenback gets from being the world's reserve currency. Despite that, I would actually say, my own sense is that the US has overplayed its hand this time. Despite the advantage of having the reserve currency, the kind of fiscal spending that they've done, I think they've spent as if there is no tomorrow. I'll tell you that there are some friends of my daughter. My daughter studies at the University of Chicago. Friends of my daughter who have, because they are US citizens, they've actually gotten $5,000 checks, from the federal government in the US. Now, remember, these are kids that are going to the University of Chicago. These don't require doles. And yet, the US government has basically sent them dole checks, right? So, which tells you actually about the kind of egregious, spending without and not so well directed at all that has been done by the US government. We certainly have been far more careful on these things, and we've spent our fiscal space very, very judiciously, and I think overall we will be beneficiary of that.
Thank you for that. It really does clarify a number of things. I'd also like to ask, based on the asset monetization scheme just unveiled on the 23rd of August, which shows both innovation and intent on part of the government. What are your views to ensure that there's speedy implementation, good implementation? What are the caveats and precautions that should be considered during the implementation to safeguard the interests of the nation?
See, let me first clarify something, some rhetoric that is put out whenever the word privatization or asset monetization is used. There is these two words, family silver, that is that people say, oh, we are going and selling the family silver. And let me clarify there. I think both words are quite misplaced. Leave the rhetoric apart. Let's look at the evidence. When you talk about the word family, I think people like you who are part of the private sector have every reason to feel, offended that you are basically not seen as part of the family. Our economy is one family with public sector and private sector being siblings in that family. So I think this argument, which actually, of course, is an appendage that has existed because of the socialist era, where we only think about actually the public sector as a sibling and the private sector as the orphan child. I think you can see that therefore that word family does not fit at all. Especially given the history that you talked about, India, became so prosperous up until 1750. Not by being a socialistic state. In fact, that entire socialist model is basically an import from other countries, Germany and continental Europe. It is not a model that India ever pursued. India actually, pursued markets. So I think basically this is sort of a rhetoric that comes about from a model that was not fit for India and therefore never worked, and yet basically is used for rhetoric. So the word family itself is misplaced, in this context, because both public sector and private sector are siblings in this family, which we call the economy, the Indian economy. As for the silver, and I think we showed it very, very clearly in the 2020 economic survey. We wrote a chapter which was titled "Privatization and Wealth Creation," where we showed how privatization leads to benefits for everyone, all the stakeholders, even job creation, for instance, the number of jobs that are created. Because when you have an inefficient firm cannot hire more people. It's only when it becomes efficient can it hire more people. And because you cannot continue forever, paying salaries out of actually if you're not profitable. So and not just that, shareholders are also people like us, basically, who invest in stock markets. Shareholders, suppliers, employees, all of them benefit taxpayer. That the amount of tax that gets collected. So privatization is indeed one that has actually what I would say is not silver. It converts it into silver. So neither the word family nor the word silver actually is it is based on any evidence. It is just empty rhetoric that is used, and as I said, it actually is a remnant from the socialist era. Now let's think about actually privatization and asset monetization in this context. See, when you and maybe as you all as entrepreneurs must be doing this. Some assets you go and buy them directly, but some assets you lease, you don't buy them, right? And both models are simultaneously followed. You may want to own some assets, but some assets you may lease. Now, now take the parallel actually to this parallel and think about privatization and asset monetization. Asset monetization is basically to enable leasing of assets, those assets that are not being used fully or are idle in the economy. For instance, if you take stadiums, for example, stadiums get used maybe some days of the year. They don't get used all 365 days of the year. And if you lease the stadium for use during times when it is not being used currently, that clearly enhances productivity in the economy. It is not a sale, it is only a lease. It's like if you think about the Uber car that I order, for that 1 hour of travel, I'm effectively leasing that car and I'm paying a rental, right? So that's all, so this I think this concept that asset monetization is about selling the country's assets, I think really stems from complete lack of understanding of even basic economics, and so it is clearly not appropriate in the context of asset monetization. Privatization, as I said, is actually one where ownership is being transferred. The private sector will own those assets, and that is also something, as we've just mentioned, that enhances efficiency. So I think as it is oftentimes with a lot of rhetoric, it's devoid of content.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I think part of this is the political brownie point scoring that happens very often. And unfortunately, we get sucked into that.
No, Sunil, actually, see, I will, as an economist, I will mention this. Having, lived in the US for 10 years and, and visited, many advanced economies, I think everybody has to basically do whatever is part of their profession. I'm not denying that. But what I have noticed actually is, for instance, in the advanced economies, even when political points, brownie points are scored, they're scored, not by just basically keeping common sense on one side. You basically the political brownie points are scored by making intelligent points, which is something that actually is so understanding, in this case, for instance, what is really asset monetization, going and understanding and then making a distinction. At the very least, go and make a distinction between privatization versus asset monetization. The rhetoric that is basically put out for privatization, same rhetoric, copy paste and put it out for asset monetization. I think it just basically conveys a lack of homework. I think the level of political debate itself actually would be far more elevated if it is, if the scoring of brownie points is done in a much more intelligent manner.
Yes, sir. And I think part of it, I think we as citizens have to also insist on better, whatever is put on our plate, because unless we ask for better, we are going to get this information, half-baked information. Sir, I also wanted to, bring on the table something that Gandhiji had said a long time ago, that real rights are a result of the performance of duties. He believed that the importance of all of us Indian citizens following this path to building our dream nation. Sir, please share your thoughts on the real building blocks of a sensitive but a strong nation.
It's a very good question again, Sunita. I think I don't know what might have been the motivator for the Mahatma to actually talk about this, but I'm guessing, given that he was such a believer in the Bhagavad Gita, and he used to read that very, very closely. I am thinking that this idea must have come from the word, from the concept of dharma. Something that all of us actually really have inherited. See, when we follow the dharma, or do our dharma very well, in other words, our karma is done in a way that it actually fulfills our dharma. In that process, then we typically do not create unintended bad consequences for anybody. So if each one of us follows the dharma properly, then this distinction between rights and responsibilities, and actually part of dharma is to understand that rights and responsibilities are just two sides of the same coin. Unfortunately, oftentimes what happens is each one of us basically thinks about our rights, our entitlements, but we do not focus as much attention on our responsibilities. And I think John F. Kennedy said this very beautifully when he said, "Think not what the nation can do for you, think what you can do for the nation." I think that captures this idea of your duties, your responsibilities, which is what dharma, sort of doing a dharma, really encompasses, rather than just thinking about our entitlements. And I think if each one of us follows our dharma very well and focuses on our responsibilities, then the need for others to emphasize their entitlements just does not arise. To give you a very simple example, let's say, if staying as neighbors, and it is your dharma to basically go to keep the corridor clean, not go and put trash outside. Now, only when you basically, or I do not follow that dharma and actually go and put that trash, let's say, outside, does the neighbor have to come and basically, remind us of our entitlement? If I basically do my dharma very well, which is that I keep that corridor clean, I do not, put kachra there, right? Then there is no need for my neighbor to come and remind me of or remind me of her entitlement, or his entitlement, right? This examples in some sense captures the fact that if we do our responsibilities very well, there is no need for anyone to remind us of our, of their entitlements. And I think the reason we actually have, this question itself coming up is because, we read these scriptures, but oftentimes it is basically as knowledge that sits in those books. It does not, come out in action, and I actually am reminded of this wonderful saying, in the Bhajagovindam song. There is a C. Rajagopal Achari actually delivers the commentary on Bhajagovindam. All of us as Tambrams have actually been privileged to, to hear the Bhajagovindam from a very young age. And before that, C. Rajagopal Achari's talk comes, and he mentions there, he says, knowledge that does not issue out in action is useless tinsel. I'll say it again because these are such precious words. Knowledge that does not issue out in action is useless tinsel. I think, that is what I want to actually mention in this the context of this question, that it is not enough for us to basically go and, basically, if we have an altar, go and pray. If basically that prayer does not really result in action, for instance, if we go and say the shlokam, let's say Shantakaram Bhujanga Shayanam, about Mahavishnu, then some of those attributes have to start coming into us. Shant Akaram Bhujanga Shayanam, is basically, sleeping on a seven-hooded serpent, and yet is basically Shant Akar. How many of us can forget seven-hooded serpent on your head? Even if we see basically a serpent from 1 kilometer far, we may as well will start, getting so jittery. So I think, in other words, what you read and the Lord that we pray to, irrespective, whatever religion, some of those virtues have to come out in our action. Otherwise, it is useless tinsel. Knowledge without, without issuing it out in action actually is just useless tinsel. And also at this, it's oftentimes basically, I think something that we have to really be very, very cognizant about, that, the concept of dharma, the concept of our responsibilities, it's not just enough to talk about it. We have to actually bring it out in action. Only then, will we have the situation where nobody needs to talk about their entitlements, because that will automatically happen. There is no need for separate, thinking about entitlements then.
Thank you again, Dr. Subramanian. I think again, the ancient knowledge and the belief in, and I think now everyone's talking about Om, which is like embodiment of yourself with the higher self, and how you brought it into our normal life. It's something to really learn and implement by all of us. I now would like to request Ujjwala to come and ask a few questions as well.
Thank you. A topic which is very much today in news is, according to Chain Analysts and Financial Express, cryptocurrency adoption is the highest in emerging markets. India is the second highest, has the second highest level of cryptocurrency adoption globally, which shows that crypto investments are widespread in Indian economy. What are your views on this parallel ecosystem?
This is, a very important question. Let me give you the following example. Let's take and I'm giving two examples of innovations in the financial sector. So let's take, for instance, the Jan Dhan Yojana, which basically was a program of financial inclusion. If those of you who are wondering, why am I starting this answer with, Jan Dhan, answering cryptocurrency, just be patient, I'll connect the dots. If you take Jan Dhan Yojana as an example of a financial innovation, it makes enormous difference to the real lives of people. So an example of a financial innovation that has positive impact on the real sector. In contrast, let me, take the example of, while this is something that, is not legal, but take, for instance, derivatives transactions. Derivatives transactions is legal. I'm giving some other example, but let me take derivatives itself. Derivatives, when it is used for risk management, fine. It's very useful, generates value for the real economy. But when derivatives are just used for, let's say, just pure trading, without much value for the real economy, it becomes a zero-sum game. In other words, my loss is your profit, or your profit is my loss. That's what, now, using these two examples, let's try and understand the cryptocurrencies. If cryptocurrency is something that benefits the real economy, those aspects of, where, let's say, in a way that, it brings in investments into real firms, which, traditional currency will not bring, and you need only cryptocurrency for such investments. If such investments are large, and then there is benefit for the real economy. At this point, I'm yet to see, see that part. As of now, cryptocurrency is basically just, it's a zero-sum game still, which is, somebody who's benefiting, I go and sell my cryptocurrency, you buy it, let's say, and the value of the cryptocurrency goes up, in a month's time. I end up, I have a notional loss. You have a profit. So that's basically, in some sense. So when you take me and you together, it's a zero-sum game, because my loss is your profit, and vice versa. Till the time that this innovation, the benefits of that to the real economy is not very, very clear, I am, not fully convinced about the value of that to the economy. And this is despite, huge investments being made, by people, and which, my view at this point, looking at the data, it is just basically the zero-sum game, that is being played. So to use an example, for instance, a different example, take Satta. If you're doing Satta, right? You go and bet. Betting is a zero-sum game. The person who wins the bet, gets money. The person who actually loses the bet loses money. Money changing hands. But between the two of them, it is still zero-sum. So if basically, let's say, Ujjwala and I sit all day and just keep betting on different activities that are going on. I say, hey, Ujjwala, I'm betting today that it's going to rain, 100 rupees. If I win the bet, and you give me 100 rupees, and, later in the day, actually, she says, Ujjwala says, hey, Subbu, I'm betting that, the sun is going to basically set at this point in time, whatever. We keep doing that. It's just, I don't think we're doing any real activity. Both of us are just basically exchanging money between the two of us. Are we creating any real activity? No, because we're basically sitting at our places and just exchanging money between the two of us. I think that actually illustrates, what is a zero-sum game versus something that really adds to real sector activity.
Thank you again, Dr. Subramanian. I'd like to ask something that has been on my mind for some time. And this is regarding the fuel prices and, the inflationary pressure that it's having, and also the impact on the common man. Do you think it is time to bring the petroleum products in the ambit of the GST to control the same? What other measures can be taken to control, since there are so many levies and taxes, besides the central taxes that are levied? Is there a rationale for this whole thing? I mean, why this is being delayed, or what can be done?
See, the economics on this is very, very clear, Sunita. I think it makes economic sense definitely to bring this under the the petroleum products in the GST ambit, but it is not the economics as much as the the politics that is the bigger role player in this particular decision, because this is a decision that will have to be taken by the GST Council, and the GST Council includes all the states. For the states to basically say that, okay, we will give up the right to tax fuel, and let it be decided by the GST Council. That's where it starts, mattering. I think the economics is very clear that the economy will definitely benefit from, bringing the, all the fuels, under the ambit of GST.
Okay, sir. So, sir, are we going to be pursuing this, like at your level or at the government's level, to try and bring this?
This is something that will have to be actually considered. It's been things like these are debated at the GST Council. But because this is something that does not just involve the union government, it involves all the state governments as well. It'll be difficult for me to comment because I am actually a representative of the union government.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Sir, I also wanted to discuss something that you had mentioned in the economic survey. You had made a very strong case for innovation, investment in innovation versus the Indian Jugaad. And we found some dividends during the pandemic response that we've had. How can we further this mindset in India, as investment in R&D will create a strong base for value creation and for growth?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point. So you're right. If you look at the vaccines that we've come up with, one indigenously produced vaccine, and the other one, which is Covaxin, and the other one, Covishield, which was basically adapted from AstraZeneca. The fact that we have been able to vaccinate almost 60 crore people, now, I think is very important. And actually think about the counterfactual, where let's say we did not have these two vaccines, we had to depend on the advanced economies for them to give their Pfizer or Moderna. I can tell you that we wouldn't have even done 5 to 6 crores by this time. So where is 60 crores and where, let's say 5 to 6 crores, because supply would have been a huge problem. And that I think conveys actually the huge benefits of innovation that the economy generates. Now, what is the challenge? As we showed in the economic survey, for the level of development that we are in, the government, actually the central government, does more than its share of investing in innovation. If you take, for instance, the advanced economies, almost 70 cents to every dollar or 70 paisa to every rupee of money that goes into innovation is put by the private sector in advanced economies. Only about 30 paisa is actually put by the government. This is, in India, it is reversed. Almost, I'm sort of rounding out numbers, so I'm using approximations. But in India, 70 paisa is actually done, by the government, and 30 paisa by the private sector. And therefore, it is for people like you, all of you entrepreneurs, to really think about innovation. And it's not enough to just say, oh, you need to innovate more. We have to ask the question, why is it that private sector does not innovate as much? I think it is because of a lot of myopia in decision making. Money today is always, in some sense, this is sort of the bird in the hand fallacy versus the two in the bush. Innovation is always about pursuing those two in the bush. Not just two in the bush, 10 in the bush, versus one in your hand. And until we continue having this mindset that one hand, a bird in hand is basically better than two in the bush, I think there is that myopia in the in decision making will not really go away. And I think having sort of had exposure to corporate level boards, so I think this is something which I actually start seeing that this decision making needs to be far more visionary. For instance, I'll let me take this example. There are phases, for instance, before the global financial crisis struck, a lot of our firms were making profits basically hands down, right? Both hands, dono haathon se lapet rahe the, right? That would have been the time to actually put that cash back in for innovation, and yet that did not happen. I think if you have to actually become innovative, I think companies have to recognize that your entire existence may be in question if you do not innovate today. I'll remind all the participants about a case study that we learned when I was at IIM Calcutta, the case study of IBM. The IBM mainframes division continued to continue to prevail that personal computers, etc., ain't happening. They're never going to come, right? Why? Because the mainframes, they wanted to continue to basically be powerful, and yet they ended up becoming dinosaurs. So like that, those who basically keep denying, innovation ऐसी बात करने की है, right? They risk becoming dinosaurs. I think the sooner that the corporate sector realizes, especially post-COVID, the kind of disruptions that are happening, I think this is something which all of us have to take into account. This is not the India of 2014, where incumbents and cronies basically were the ones that were making profits. We have more than 100 unicorns today, and these are all companies that have been created based on the quality of their ideas. They've not been created because their dads or their uncles gave them money. This is not because of dynastic succession. This is not because of their political connections either. This is just the pure merit of their idea and investors putting money in. I think that, if tomorrow, any of the companies actually will not necessarily be in business, it is because of these unicorns basically going and eating a lunch. And I think the sooner that the incumbents recognize this, the better it would be. That you need to innovate for your own survival. You need to get out of this bird in the hand fallacy for your own survival. I think this is something we showed in the 2020 survey as well. If you look at the companies that are part of Sensex, go and look at the companies that were part of the Sensex in 1990s. I think less than 3 or 4 companies are there today in the Sensex. That tells you actually how, all those companies, of course, because they were part of the Sensex, thought, "Arey, hum to dada hai, rahenge aise hi," right? And naamo nishan nahi hai aaj unka Sensex mein. I think that tells you actually how important innovation is. The startup phenomenon, the unicorns actually are something that will definitely challenge, and so incumbent companies really need to focus on innovation, to continue where they are. This is like like being on the treadmill. If you have to stay where you are, you have to continue running.
That's an excellent explanation, sir. And I think with the startup culture coming into India in a big way, I think things are set to change for sure. I'd again like to request Ujjwala to come and ask a question. Ujjwala, hello.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was on mute. Farm reforms are much awaited and an important step in opening the farming sector, which should create gains to Indian farmers and agro-based industry. And yet we see so much outcry against it. How can this trust deficit to be addressed, and what is the way out from blinking match between the government and the farmer bodies?
So, see, if you look at the protest, I've had the opportunity now to travel through Singur over the last couple of months, a few times, and I've therefore seen the kind of people who are there. What struck me is large proportion of those tents that have been created there have a dish antenna, have an air conditioner, if not an air conditioner, certainly a cooler, and and these are mostly from one state, people from one state. And I was left wondering, could a poor farmer afford to firstly be there for 6 to 8 months without any work, and that too with a dish antenna and with an air conditioner? I was really left wondering about that. And I know when we were passing through Singur, I observed this very, very carefully and sort of made a mental note, of how many of these. And and actually was genuinely surprised by the proportion of these huts that had these really, very, very sort of costly facilities. The reason I'm actually bringing this up is to say that I do not agree with this assertion that the protest is widespread. There's nothing in the south of India, or I don't see. I mean, I don't know. I've not been to the east of India recently. Well, take that back. I did go to Guwahati, a few months back, twice, and I actually went through. I don't see anything there. I don't see anything in South India. So, I think this assertion that this that these protests are actually have sort of any spread across the country, I dispute that very, very strongly. I think related to this, I'll give you a data point. If you look at the price at which paddy was sold by a farmer in Punjab, versus a farmer in Bihar. I'm giving you data here. A farmer in Bihar had to sell paddy at between 800 to 1200 rupees per quintal, while the farmer in Punjab, sold it at about 3,500 rupees per quintal. This is 2021. So you can see how the prices that are being that you're getting across states, is very, 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 very skewed. So there is the political economy here. Typically, political economy of reform is such that it actually puts in contention two sets of stakeholders. One, who are the vocal minority that are impacted, by these reforms, and a silent majority that is going to benefit from these reforms. I have absolutely no doubt as an economist that the silent majority is that of poor farmers, who will get the option to go and sell their produce to, someone else, because this is just plain common sense that if I, for instance, let's say if I go to Fashion Street in Bombay, and I want to buy a shirt, the particular shop that I walk into tells me that, sab 500 rupees ka hai, and I say 500 rupees bahut zyada hai. Let's say, maybe 500 rupees is not too much, but for argument's sake, let's say, in which case I say, let me walk to the next store, that he will say, okay, sab 400 rupees mein le lo aap, right? He will bargain. But if he knows where, if he's the only shop there selling that shirt, and I so basically say, 500 rupees bahut zyada hai, so he'll say, sab lena hai to lo, nahi lena hai to mat lo. That is what he'll basically, just plain common sense. What is the, what is the point of this? That when you have another option to go and sell, that basically enables you to bargain. So if I'm a small farmer, when I take my produce in the morning, I actually load my truck, or my tractor, the trolley of my tractor, get up early in the morning, reach the APMC, and say that, saab main ye bechna chahta hu. I basically tell the Arhatia. The Arhatia knows that you can't go anywhere else. The Arhatia will keep you there till 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and 4 o'clock, at 4 or 5, you are worried actually सड़ जाएगा, मान लीजिए गोभी है, आलू है, जो भी है, actually वापस ले जाऊंगा तो सड़ जाएगा, चलो इसको बेच के ही चला जाता हूँ. So what basically I will do is whatever price I'm being given by the Arhatia, I will go and sell it at that price, and that is what actually the lack of an option does. But if I have the option, I can go and sell it to somebody else. It could be a corporate as well. I can tell that Arhatia at 10:30, 11, say, साहब, मैं आके 2 घंटा बैठा हूँ यहाँ पे, आपको यदि आप खरीद रहे हो तो एक्चुअली मैं रुकता हूँ, वरना मैं एक्चुअली बगल वाली जो मंडी है या बगल वाले जो कॉर्पोरेट वाले हैं उनको जाकर बेच देता हूँ. And the Arhatia will say, okay, if he knows that there is that option, he'll buy. And this is just plain common sense. I think nothing else that actually. So the beneficial group is a silent, majority of small and marginal farmers who will really, they are the ones that will benefit. As I already told you, the vocal minority is basically those that have benefited so far over the last 70 years. So I think the political economy needs to be recognized here very, very clearly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for answering that question and putting so many things in perspective. And I know that you're, stressed for time. Your officer told me, that you have time only till 4. We have a number of questions and we'd love to ask you more. And thank you so much for being here. I'd now like to invite Ujjwala ji to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you. It is my pleasure today to propose the vote of thanks for this very enriching and informative session. On behalf of Flo and myself, I extend my sincere thanks to Mr. KV Subramanian for gracing today's session. Mr. Subramanian has put forward some very pertinent points on the Indian economic transition and the way forward. Thank you once again, Mr. Subramanian. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.